Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Hiram Butler. This is The Goal of Life. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various topics that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but you are more than welcome to tag along. Some people seem to find enjoyment in it. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there are several playlists linked in the corner up here in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of why exactly it is that I am stepping on toes. Of particular note, again, today is almost certainly going to be the Unconventional Bible Study. There are 161 videos that explain exactly where I stand and why I stand there, and you are more than welcome to check those out. With that being said, we are going to dive into today, Chapter 5, Evolution. This is probably going to be a short one. These chapters are a little bit shorter than they were in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, so we don't get quite an hour out of them. And the next two chapters seem to go together, so I'm going to try and do those together. This one will be a standalone evolution. Let us dig in and see what's up with evolution. There are many difficulties in the way of the universal acceptance of evolution as an established fact, as an obvious law of nature. And at the foundation of these difficulties is the Christian belief, which underlies our civilization. I have problems with evolution. Let's go ahead and talk about it right here at the top, right? That way we can refer to it as we go through. I do believe that evolution happens, but I do not believe that macro evolution ever happened. By that I mean, I do not believe that we all evolved from some single-celled organism through random chance through millions of years. The planet may have been here for millions of years, but that does not mean that humanity came from amoebas. It is not entirely outside of the scope of things that evolution could have happened. I can understand how they got the theory, but there are several instances in which it is proven to be at least a little bit unreliable. One of those is humanity itself. There is no biological imperative for losing your hair, right? There is no biological imperative. Like, I have a fairly good bit of hair, right? It grows in my head pretty good too. Not so much on my body. I don't have a whole covering. I like to call it lightly wooded or lightly forested, because it's there, but it's not significant. Not as if I was a, gorilla or a chimpanzee who are completely covered in hair, and because of that they are able to stay out in nature with no problems whatsoever. There is no biological imperative for humanity to have lost that covering of hair and to have to kill something else in order to make something to cover ourselves in. Now, we don't really use the leathers as much these days, but even plants you have to destroy in order to make something else. There's no biological imperative for that. There is no reason why you should have lost the natural covering that supposedly we had at one point in time in order to later have to create something to take the place of that. The biological imperative would to be for you to remain covered in hair and able to acclimate to the environment in the manner in which you evolved there. And that is one of the problems that we have here. The fact that the human brain is completely different than any other brain, that's another one. But here's another good example. I like to use this one a lot because it is a thing. The giraffe is an animal, right? It's tall, like 13, 14 feet tall. It's got a long way from the heart to the head. And the blood has to get there, and it has to get there effectively. And so its heart is very strong. It pumps and it squeezes that shit, and it goes all the way up against gravity. And in order to reach there, it has to get high pressure. Well, if a giraffe goes to drink water, which they do, and they lower their head below their heart, that pressure would explode their brain. But there's a switch. When their head reaches a certain level, the switch flips and the blood pressure drops. They don't receive the pressure. They drink their water, they come back up. By the time that you biologically needed that switch, it is too late to have that switch. It doesn't develop just in case, it develops because you need it. And so, in my estimation, that is one of the key ways to say, okay, macroevolution, not so much. Microevolution, however, which is development within the species, that's an absolute thing. That is what Darwin saw when he formulated his theory of evolution. Yes, there are changes within the species. Some birds have developed beaks that are specialized to reach certain plants so that they could do things. There was a biological imperative for that. There was a need within the species to change the outside of the species. The fact that we can talk on this technology is evidence of microevolution. It is the accumulation over time of knowledge and the ability to utilize that knowledge in effective manners. That is microevolution, and I absolutely believe in that. But I do not necessarily believe in macroevolution. Do I devote my days to it? No. Am I a certified expert who went to school? No. I am just some random redneck on the internet who thinks about things in a logical manner. With all that being said, I also do not believe in this. Right? I do believe that God created the world, that He created us. But I do not believe that in any way, shape, or form Christianity has it down. Right? Judaism did not understand it. Islam does not understand it. Hinduism did not really understand it. I understand all the arguments for the Vedas. We're not talking about those today. But again, not necessarily. This, the foundation of our civilization, that is true. We have, in large part, used Christian values and beliefs to formulate the civilization in which we live. But civilization is not dependent upon that. It existed well before Christianity. It existed well before Judaism, and therefore it is not entirely dependent upon their belief that everything exists. I know that is something that's probably going to step on your toes. That's why I tell you to go back and watch the Bible study. Watch what we did in Genesis as we read through it. We did word studies. We did logic, right? We went through step by step, read all of Genesis for sure, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. We read those things. We talked about them. We discussed them in real life situations. God created the earth. I don't think anybody was here when it happened. And I don't believe that He directly told anybody how He did it. I believe that people have come along and tried to rationalize it in a way that they could understand, and that is absolutely a possibility. I do believe that there were civilizations prior to Noah, prior to Adam, prior to, right? There was something, in my estimation, 12,000 years ago. I have a whole video. I'll try to remember to link it up here, but it is called the 12,000 year disaster cycle. You can go back and see the evidence for that. We went through Plato in the ancient lore playlist. We read Cretaeus and Timaeus, and we understood the story of Atlantis and where that came from and the details involved in that. And that again leads me to believe that there was something here prior to Eden. I believe that the Eden event was a thing, that they were cast out from where they were. There was a giant flaming sword, and they did the best they could to understand that and to relay that information. But that does not necessarily mean that there was an angel standing there with a flaming sword. It could have been a flaming sword just being described in the best manner that it could possibly be. So, while I do not believe that macroevolution is responsible for most of this, right? Again, like there's no reason for a biological imperative for that, right? But those two examples are fairly good ones in my estimation, and that is the ones that I go to most to talk about this, because I don't believe in macroevolution. I believe in microevolution. I do believe in creation. I don't know who created us. I don't know how it was done. It could have been angels. It could have been demons. It could have been aliens. It could have been whatever. I don't know. I believe in God. I believe that there is a purpose for being here, but it is not tied to Christianity or Judaism. And if any of that offended you, then once again, this is probably not going to be the study for you, because I doubt it gets better from here. The The Christian world has believed it to be a literal fact that in 6 days God created the world and everything in it, and then ceased from the work of creation. Recently, however, there has been such an accumulation of evidence disproving this statement that the majority of thinkers are rejecting the old form of belief. And it is now generally accepted that in place of 6 days, we must understand 6 periods of time, cycles. This is in accord with the words of the Christ, who, when he was rebuked for working on the Sabbath day, replied, "My Father worketh even until now, and I work." John, verse 17. If God had not ceased from his work at the time of Christ, we have no reason to think that he has ceased at the present time. On the contrary, we see progression all around us in every department of life. If a nation ceases to progress, renew its life, and constantly unfold higher characteristics, it soon perishes and passes away, and the individual is subject to the same law. We have but to look back 50 years to see the marked progress, not only in science, art, and mechanics, but in the actual brain power and organic quality of the people. Another difficulty in the way of accepting the theory of evolution is that the works of archaeologists have revealed indications of a high state of a civilization, which antedates history. It has been urged, and we think reasonably, that there are evidences of an early civilization more advanced than our own. Again, the 12,000-year disaster cycle will give you more information. Or Plato, either one. We should remember that there are a few isolated cases in which even the American Indian has obtained knowledge of certain things that we do not possess. And certainly more should be expected of old nations that had reached a comparatively high state of civilization. Racial evolution. We're going to go ahead and say here that there were beliefs back then that we don't necessarily hold today, and I don't know what's in here, but it is possible that there are some of those. I'm going to read them as they're written. It is not my beliefs. It has been said, and it is a historic fact, that the star of the empire westward takes its course. We have before us today the great old nation of China, embodying the civilization of a remote period. Next, in order of time and place, come India, Egypt, and the countries east of the Mediterranean, Palestine, where our Lord gave the revelation of the Christian religion. The religion has traveled westward over the continent of Europe until it has reached the Atlantic coast and has crossed to America, where its light shines from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the dawn of which is beginning to break over China and India. No, that took a decidedly not turn, right? This was back at the turn of the last century, and there has been significant progress in the opposite direction in both China and India. So while they may have been on their way to progress, they have been absolutely stunted in that. China by Mao and India by various other forces. But communism put an abrupt halt to any westward expansion of the light. That stopped. Again, civilization in its nature is cumulative, like the winding of a thread upon a ball. As, in a sense, it overlaps itself, it buries beneath the surface of the old, only that it may establish the new upon ever higher ground. When we look for an immediate cause for the successive rise and decadence of nations and their civilizations, we find that each nation, having reached in its turn a comparatively high state of development, probably as high as it was capable of reaching, was overcome and destroyed by nations less advanced than itself. For history makes the fact clear that as man ascends in the scale of development, he sees the folly of war, combat, and struggle. He tires of struggling and arranges an order of peace, and thus soon loses the ability to protect himself when the lower races come in and destroy him. We also find the civilization of a nation has been led out always by some special principle. In the case of the Greeks, it was the love of beauty and the perfection of physical manhood. We may say that art was the center of their civilization. See, That's self-insertion, right? You're assuming that yours is better and that theirs was pagan, and therefore the only reason for their civilization was for beauty, and that is simply not true. That doesn't mean that they did not value beauty or they did not value art, but you cannot build a civilization around just art. It's not going to happen. You can appreciate beauty, you can appreciate art, but in order to do that, you have to be civilized already, right? Civilization is us deciding these are the rules, we are going to live by them. And while your morality and the Greeks' morality may not exactly line up perfectly, there was some overlap, and the Greeks were quite developed, and they had civilization completely separate from anything Judaic or Christian. And so to say that it is dependent on that is a little bit outside of the box. With the Romans, it was of conquest and love of power, which degenerated into self-indulgence and oppression, until finally they lost their power and fell. The center around which the civilization of Egypt gathered was magic, the laws of nature, the psychic forces in the human family. And that is an assumption, right? We assume that from some of the things that were written, but we don't know exactly what ancient Egypt even really did. We have some indication, right? We've made progress towards translating the hieroglyphs, and we understand the things that they recorded, but there was something there prior, and to think that you have the full scope of the entirety of a civilization simply because you can read this set of hieroglyphs is again just a bit of a stretch, right? Now, did they do magic? Yes. Were they concerned with the laws of nature? Yes. But to say that it's centered around it is again just an assumption. Thus, could we possess the history and detail of every nation that has risen and fallen, we should find that, like vegetable life, each possessed its own specific quality. Each grew and matured a special quality of mind, which, like the husk of the grain of wheat, enveloped some great truth. And when maturity came and its work was accomplished, the nation passed away as a form of vegetable life that had borne its ripe fruitage. And I don't necessarily completely disagree with that. I just don't think that we know what the fruit was. However, we find that the civilization of the present age has reached a point where science and mechanics have obliterated space. And, in a sense, time. No. The whole world, the ancient and the modern, is rapidly being spread before the public gaze. And our race of today is eagerly gathering all the grains of wheat, the great central truths that have matured in the mind of civilizations from the earliest times throughout its successive stages to the present. Libraries, so ancient that history has no record of the people that made them, are now being unearthed. Nations, so far removed in the dim twilight of the past that we have no means of knowing the time of their existence, are now presenting the very details of their domestic life to our scrutiny. All these things demonstrate the fact that the race has now reached a state of development where it feels the need of, and consequently is about to gather, the ripe fruitage of all ages. The race is delving into the quarries of the present and of the past, that, from the work of the hewers of all nations in all times, it may construct a temple of knowledge transcending Solomon's. That's not hard to do. In all its glory, transcending anything that has ever existed upon the planet. I have a lot of problems with Solomon. You should definitely refer back to Kings and Chronicles if you have a problem with that. It is too much to go into here. While the accumulating of knowledge has been going on so rapidly during the last century, the mind of the scientist has been intently fixed upon material manifestation. He has searched wisely and diligently for causation in every physical direction, until he has reached the last residuum of matter, a mere point of force, and he can go no further until he recognizes the source and nature of this force. As there are small cycles of national development and race development, so there are great cycles of world development, planetary cycles. That is true. If we have had a history of the grand cycle preceding the present one, the elder world, to Esdras 7:13, to which there are numerous incidental references in our Bible, and of which the sacred books of the East speak so positively, then we should find that while its people reached a high state of maturity and spirituality, they were a race round lower than the present humanity. Evolution of the planet. Modern scientists run back in the history of the Earth to the time supposed to have existed when the planet was nebulous matter floating in space, and there they must stop. For in following theories relative to the formation of the Earth, many of them ignore the idea of a God, a creator, and say that everything is the outcome of natural law. In the very presence of a disaster like the great earthquake in San Francisco, even the clergy unite in saying that God had nothing to do with it, that it was simply a natural phenomenon. This is as much to say that God has nothing to do with the affairs of nations or of men, that natural law and the phenomena of nature are all there is. They do not think sufficiently to ask, what is meant by natural law? It is true that everything follows a certain sequence. Cause and effect run through everything that we know, but let us trace back a little further. Let us turn the telescope upon space. Way yonder we see a nebulous mass, bright and luminous as a flaming sun. But as we carefully observe it, we find that we can look through it at some great sun in the far distance, as if the nebula were but a thin veil over the face of the star, thus proven beyond question that this nebulous matter is what has been denominated luminous gas. Many theories have been advanced concerning this luminous substance, and many have concluded that it is a gas heated to great intensity, and at the same time they tell us that it is floating in a medium 100 if not 1,000 times colder than the temperature at the North Pole. It is energized plasma. That is what you see. It is not gas in the purest sense of the word. It is an altered form made so by the electromagnetic currents that run through the entirety of the universe. That has become more and more apparent in the last decade. The James Webb Space Telescope has given us remarkable insights to the interconnectivity of every single solar system in the entirety of the universe. Everything that we can observe, at least. There is a plasma filament that runs between them, and at times it is charged and luminous, and at times it is dark and not. That is definitely a thing. Again, I am not the scientist. I can't pull out the data for you, but Ben Davidson over at Suspicious Observers, the guys over at the Thunderbolts Project, they can give you a very good understanding of that if that is something that you are more interested in. They are, both of them are part of the channels that I highlight on my channel. So if you go to my page on YouTube, there are links provided for them there. But no one has attempted to tell us why this luminous gas, interpenetrated by and floating at such cold, can remain heated to the intensity claimed. We can now. They may philosophize and try to explain how it is possible for intense heat to be retained when interpenetrated and surrounded by intense cold. But the fact remains that nothing that is known to man makes it possible for a cloud of gas to remain heated for 1 second in a medium so contrary to heat, to say nothing of the untold years that it is supposed to have remained in this state. That is part of the disaster cycle, in fact, right? Like the 12,000 year disaster cycle touches on that, but not really. But the plasma interactions, that is a thing, right? It is an observable thing that we are able to reproduce in a laboratory. Right? This is not just speculative anymore. It is literally becoming an accepted fact. I don't know that it is fully accepted now because the dogmas and the doctrines of the day keep you from the knowledge that is there in many ways, right? Christianity does that in some places, Islam does that in some places, and academic science does that in other places. In order to account for its luminosity under such conditions, we must look for something beyond the experience of everyday life. The recent discovery of radium, however, evinces the fact that it is possible for an element of nature to remain in a luminous state, and actually heated to a certain degree, even when the cold of liquid air cannot extinguish. In this newfound element on the borderline between spirit and the natural world is this newfound element. If we interrogate the Bible, we find there are numerous accounts of visitations from the spirit world, sometimes in a flame of fire, as God appeared to Moses in a burning bush, and the bush was not consumed. At other times, the person of the visitant was said to be as shining as the light, or as bright as the sun. When a holy one from the spirit world enters a man's presence, though it be in the darkness of the night, in the darkest room, the darkness is at once dissipated and all is bright and luminous. The luminous brightness is not seen merely with the spiritual eye, but with the natural eye as well. We read that God is spirit and dwells in the light that no man can approach. Again, the assertion is emphatic that by the word of God the worlds were made, and surely we cannot believe that God created something from nothing. Therefore, God created from himself. Yes, and this nebulous matter of which worlds are formed is the substance of spirit, a substance which is the emanation of a thought of divinity. We think, form conclusions, and when the conclusions are reached, we express them in words and acts. When we say that we express them, we mean that there goes out from us the thought form. In like manner, when in connection with the other creative words, the Elohim said, "Let us make man," the thought was formed in the mind and sent out into space. The substance of his own great nature appeared luminous and bright, as the body of an angel, which scientists call cosmic gas. As this cosmic gas was a thought of divinity, its mind power became what is known as the laws of nature, and, in the eons of time, formed our earth, and has carried forward evolutionary development of individual organisms, step by step, to the present time. Here, we are met by two apparent discrepancies. First, that spirit is invisible to man, and second, that planets are born from their parent suns. Sorry. Both of these objections resolve themselves into one, and in reply it may be said that if God created the world and what is in it from himself, and if God is spirit, then all that is must be a condition of spirit. Man, the product of that creative mind, is able to recognize through the five senses that only which is upon a plane similar to his own. Therefore, as the spirit appears to us in the creation of worlds, it first manifests itself as light, and also as heat because of the intensity of its vibration. Thus, it is in this form that the Word of God appears in the very beginning of material substance. In regard to the second objection, that God cannot be the creator of worlds if they are born from their parent suns, it may be further suggested that, if God is the producer of all things, the life and substance of all substance, the soul of all souls, then wherever God works there is form and function. Worlds and suns are in form, and their inhabitants that have become the embodiment of spirit, the Elohim, are his function. God works in man and woman in the creation of offspring, and should we deny that he is working in the creation of worlds through their parent sons? I believe that science is how God does it, right? You don't have to agree with that, and I believe that there was some manner of placement or alteration that was outside of the natural bounds that created us. Now, whether chimps came from amoebas, you can fight over that, I don't care. Humans didn't, right? And so, while we may have been chimps at some point, we were drastically altered, either intentionally or unintentionally. It could have been cosmic radiation in the 12,000-year disaster cycle that allowed it to happen. That is possible, but there was no biological imperative driving it. It could be nuclear bombardment from outer space. It could be solar rays. It could be X-rays. It could be whatever it happens to be that changed the DNA in such a way that it became what we are. I believe that it was probably an intentional thing for various reasons, but not the least of which is the records that are outside of the accepted doctrines, right? The various myths in aggregate all tell the same story. There was some type of an intervention at some point. And so for me, that's enough, right? I don't need it to be this exactly is how it happened. That's not how I work. I am good enough with that makes more sense than this does. So we'll go with that unless something else comes along to show us a difference, right? Like evolution was fine until you actually start digging into the mechanics of it, and then it doesn't work. Even Darwin knew that. But I do believe that God is the progenitor of all the things, and so it is not impossible that the worlds were created through the suns because science happens. And so, yeah. The joint evolution of planet and race. The purpose in the creation of the planet, as announced in the account of Genesis, was to make man in his image and like God. If, therefore, this was the purpose in the thought, the word, which became the creative law in all nature, then it is obvious that all things must move together toward the accomplishing of the one definite object. Even the old philosopher Plato, see the playlist, the ancient lore playlist, we have Plato, saw the image of the thought of divinity as a man stretched in the heavens. And today it is a demonstrated fact that the tendency of all creation, of all growth and development, is towards man. I don't know about that either. Just because that is where our focus is does not mean that there is not something else going on in the animal kingdom we are unaware of. Right? That is a self-insertion to a point. It is an assumption at another point. You can be fine with the assumption, right? We can be self-centered enough to think that everything is driven by us, but as Carl Sagan said, we are just a very small little piece of a very small little blue dot floating in an infinite vastness. It is a little bit heady to think it is all because of you. Not to say that why we're here doesn't have purpose or meaning. I fully believe that it does. But that doesn't mean that it is all centered around us. If we are the only life in the universe, it is a waste of resources at the very least. This being so, we see man, the most perfect manifestation of creative law, a conscious thinking, voluntary existence. The religionist says that man is a special creation. Science says that man is the product of the creative laws of the earth. Both are right, for although we read in the Revelation that God said, "Let us make man," and that he made man, yet this was in connection with and part of the creative words from which the worlds were made. See Genesis 1, and if you really want to do it, see Genesis 1. Man is a special creation because he is the special purpose and the result of all creative law. The apostles said, "For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. And not only so, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even when we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body." Romans 8:22 and 23. Yes, truly, the whole creation travaileth, and this travail of nature is to bring forth man. Again, that is an assumption and a self-insertion. The spirit of life in the grass today will be the man that will walk the planet in the far-off tomorrow. And according to the theory of spiritual evolution, which I will probably detail again at the end, that is entirely possible, right? Your intaking of the previous to make you. There is entirely a fact that somebody will intake you to make the next. But the fact is not changed. Man was created by the thought of God, and so was the world, and the two are conjoined at one. I believe that. There is, within man, an instinctive recognition of his source and destiny. The tendencies of his unbiased nature are towards God and his likeness. It has been closely observed and well said that from his incipient stages of development, man has been a religious being. A race of savages scarcely has been found so low in development that they have not had some form of religious worship or recognition of God, the source of their being. academia. You can find that right now. You can find that right now in any university across the entirety of the country, right? Probably the entirety of the world, but for sure here, you can find that here. A race of savages so low in development that they do not have a form of religious worship. At the present time, however, as a result of his selfishness, self-gratification, and intellectual egotism, man has so completely turned his back upon God and divine law that he has begun to repel the very fountain from which he derives his life. The effects of this discordant condition of man and his repellent attitude towards the source of his life are obvious. He, being the ultimate of planetary law, is in position to dominate all nature, for the declared purpose was, let them have dominion over all the earth. From a physical standpoint, the dominion of man over the earth is even now being recognized, but the materialistic tendencies of the race have prevented a recognition of the fact that the passions, emotions, desires, together with the loves and hates of the people, are a controlling principle, producing its effect throughout creative manifestation. Man is the mind center of the planet, and his body is one with the earth elements, joined to them by the mental currents that formed all things. Therefore, as the bodies of the race have become diseased through perversion, disease, and disturbance, have entered also into the very life currents of the earth, and we may reasonably expect volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, producing great destruction, fires becoming fiends, refusing to be quenched by ordinary methods, storms and cyclones. We may expect the earth to manifest the same conditions that our own bodies manifest when suffering from different phases of what we call disease, and if this should continue, the very condition of the planet will cause death, dissolution. See again the 12,000-year disaster cycle with its 6,000-year recurring manifestations. There will be a mass extinction event, but it's not because of us. We're not causing it. What's going to happen is going to happen regardless. We just need to be as prepared for it as we possibly can. If the perversion of man's nature diseases and destroys the planet, the reverse must also be true. That is, divine order and harmony manifested in the individual are a saving power to the earth. Our Lord recognized this law when he said to his followers, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under the foot of men." Matthew, verse 13. And why are you not quoting Matthew 5:13? That's what it is. Okay. I'm like, why is it not quoting it? But that's what the V is. We are told in the revelation of Jesus Christ sent to John on Patmos that there are to be 144,000 of the first ripe fruit of the earth, who are to be gathered and brought into perfect oneness and harmony with God, and to be made priests and kings unto God, and reign in the earth. As the Spirit said to Obadiah, and Savior shall come up on the mountain of Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be Yahweh's. Bear in mind, before we get any farther into this study, that it is specifically stated in this verse that those people will be righteous who have never known sexual relations or the temptations of the earth. That is specifically stated that they will be pure and holy peoples who have not succumbed to the earth. Right. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the 144,000 is relayed in the way that it is. It could be that there are 144,000 iterations of humanity, and those will be the people who are saved in the coming event. But I don't believe that either. I believe that there will be significantly more, right? Most people will die. But even if 99% of people die, that still leaves well over 144,000 people left. History, science, and revelation point down to a time, the present time or the near future, when, notwithstanding the fact that man has forgotten God, notwithstanding the diseased state of the planet, the upheavals and the destruction of life and property, which will almost depopulate the earth, there will be a saving power in a people. Again, the 12,000-year disaster cycle. And this people, by the power of unity and with the mind of God, the producer of all things, will hold the earth as a vital center, preserve its life, heal it of all disease, rejuvenate it, and repopulate it with a higher race of men. As Jesus was the great healer of all manner of diseases, so this body of 144,000 will become the great healers, not only of their interior natures of the people, but of their physical bodies and of the spirit of the life of the planet. From the foregoing presentation of the ultimate towards which the life of the planet tends, that is, to bring into manifestation a godlike manhood which is to dominate the earth, it becomes evident that a slow growth and unfoldment, evolution, has been the process of nature from the beginning of the world to the present time. If this were not true, the following and many similar questions which arise in the mind of the reasonable thinker would remain unanswerable. Namely, if there is a God, why does he permit so much anxiety, labor, and sorrow to exist in the world? Oh, look, he wrote a section for me. If there is to be a future existence, a paradise of joy and peace, why the necessity of these thousands of generations being doomed to sorrow and death? Why did not God in the beginning make man perfect and place him in that paradise, and endow him with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, so that he could not fall and plunge the race into misery for all these centuries? Why was not this kingdom of righteousness, spoken of in the revelation of Jesus Christ, commonly called the apocalyptic vision, ultimated in the beginning? The only answer to such questions is that knowledge, in its very nature, is experience. Every father and mother knows that before their sons are fitted to go out to meet the world, they must have knowledge gained from experience. The Christ announced that knowledge of the truth was to be the Savior, John 8:32, and knowledge can come into existence and form only through multifarious experiences in many lives. If you are unaware, that is true. The present exposition of the object and processes of evolution have been condensed as possible, merely suggestive of the several lines of thought and investigation connected therewith. But we think it is sufficient to make clear the fact that the very spirit of the life of the planet has in it a purpose, an object, and all manifestation of life, all activity, has moved steadily towards the ultimating of that purpose, namely to bring into existence a godlike humanity, Emmanuel, God with us, God manifest in the flesh, angel men, sons of God. No. When we say angel men or sons of God, the words are practically meaningless from the world's present understanding of God and his angels. It is therefore necessary to take a general view of the scientific knowledge of the universe and of the revelation given to men of God and his angels, so that the reader will bear with me if I seem to diverge from the general thought of this work, and to examine into the material universe, its cause, its scope and immensity, its origin and quality, into the nature of God, the soul of the universe, his manifestation in organic form, as well as the object of our existence and the ultimate towards which we, with all nature, are being led. Now, for me, there is a reason why you are here, and it is indeed experience. We, in my estimation, all existed prior to being here. We have talked about this already in this particular book, but we're going to hit it real quick. I believe that you have a purpose and that I have a purpose, and that we agreed to that purpose prior to being here. I believe that the soul, the part that makes the decisions, is eternal. It was somewheres prior, it will be somewheres after, but for now, it is here. The reason why it is here is to have experience, to learn, to grow, and to do. To seek to be God, but not necessarily to create a race of God men or angels. I do not believe that it is even possible that all of humanity will come into accord at any point in time. It is not beyond the scope of ability of God to make it happen, but if we were all perfect and holy, there would be no reason to be here. There really wouldn't. We could just stay with God. There would be no reason to incarnate if we were doing that. We are to strive for it, however, right? Us, few, the ones on the narrow path, the ones who are here to be the examples, to show the light, to be what God has called us to be. For us, we are to strive for that. Everybody's supposed to, but most people have no awareness. And so we are to be the example for them to follow. Our lives should be such an example that people want to follow it. You're not supposed to beat people over the head with rules and regulations. You're not supposed to go around condemning people and telling them that they're some kind of a sinner. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be an example of God here. You're supposed to follow His rules and His laws according to what has been laid out. Now, where you pull those rules from is going to be different from where I do, more than likely. Even if we were all given the exact same source material, which we were not, in any way, shape, or form, given the exact same source material across the planet, right? There's one race that says, oh no, we were the best race. We were the ones who got the actual knowledge, and everybody else just needs to follow us. No, there were other people. They had good knowledge too. The underlying mechanics of it is, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. Go forth, subdue the earth. Be stewards thereof. Shed no blood of man. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is the entirety of the law. The mechanics of it gets a little bit wonky, because is it loving my neighbor if I'm eating more than he is? That's part of the experience. You not eating sometimes, that's part of your experience. You getting wrathful sometimes, that's part of your experience. And you are meant to overcome, but that is through the balance of the virtues and the vices, which we talk about quite extensively. That's going to do that part. Now we're going to talk about spiritual evolution as the wrap-up for this. I believe that there are 8 planes of existence, right? Why does that look funny? Oh, this finger looks funny. I'm like, why does that look funny in my feedback? But anyway, the first plane of existence is merely existing. It is the single point. What is the single point? It is an element. It is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, whatever element you choose, right? It exists as a single point. Whenever you breathe, you take in some oxygen, and that becomes part of you. Some of it leaves you in the form of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and nitrogen's in there and all of these other elements, and you intake that. But for the second plane of existence, it's a lot easier to look at just the 2 points which make a line, right? That's basic geometry. That's why geometry is the fundamentals of the entirety of the universe. And so you have the ability to grow. Take a plant, a dandelion. A dandelion grows from a seed, and it grows up to a certain height, and it can vary a little bit in that height, and it grows to a certain thickness, and it can vary a little bit in that thickness, but it is fairly well determined. But it grows by taking in those elemental qualities and making it part of itself, incorporating it into its being. It takes the calcium and magnesium and creates the structure of the plant cells. It takes the nitrogen and the hydrogen, and it makes the energy that makes chloroform change light into food. These are things that happen. It is something that is incorporating the first plane of existence into the second plane of existence, the line instead of the point. The next plane of existence, you get a little bit of mobility. I believe that this is the simple animals. Not the ones that think and plan, but the ones that don't. There are plenty of them. Like squirrels take their food and they store it, but they don't really know what they're doing. It is an instinctive thing. They're not saying, okay, I'm going to build a storehouse and I'm going to put all of this stuff in the storehouse and I'm going to save that for winter. They find the nuts, they bury them, and then sometimes they remember where they bury them. Sometimes they don't. But they take the plant and they incorporate it, right? They take that primitive life and they turn it into a little bit more of life. That is the third plane. They have length, width, and height. They can get it bigger And they can move. They can say, you know what, it's kind of hot right here. I'm going to go lay in the shade. A plant can't do that. But the simple animal has ability to move across distance. The more complicated animal, which is the fourth plane of existence, has the ability to think just a little bit, right? Dogs, I use my dogs because they're a good example. Every single morning we go walking. I take my dogs, we go on a walk. They anticipate that. If I don't do it, they know. They know that food is coming. They know that. They have the ability to plan just a little bit, right? They're not taking and storing up food for the winter, but they know that the food should be there now. And if it's not, they know that they can say something to me, and I'm going to go and I'm going to put food in their bowl. That is, having just the rudiments of thought, you can think of it as if it was a single point of thought, right? You have the ability to get up and grow and move, and the ability for a single point of thought. Not necessarily instinct, but actual thought. I think that humans are the next step up, right? We are in the fifth plane of existence, not the third, but the fifth. And then we incorporate these animals into us, both the ones that can think and the ones that don't. And there's all kinds of ethical implications in that you can dig into. But we have the ability to think more. We have the ability to plan, to do. But we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. We kind of know what happened in the past if we recorded it properly, which is not necessarily a guarantee if you look at our histories. But we are able to view time as a line instead of a single point, that the thought as a line, right? And we have some concept of time. We don't have mastery of it. The next step, however, does. Right? The sixth step, I believe, are the elemental forces, the disincorporated spirits, but not necessarily the higher planes of spirit, right? Like, this is what they refer to in these works as undines and salamanders and things of that nature, the elemental forces of entities. Not necessarily aligned good or evil because they don't really have that capacity, but more of the underlying mechanics working type situation. This is where humans, when they die and they're better, they get held back and they become ghosts. It is another form of existence with a broader scope of time and thought than we have, but not necessarily a full mastery. So they make the triangle, right? But they don't necessarily make a cube out of it. The seventh plane of existence gets mastery over these things. That is the realm of the angels and the demons, or however you want to label those entities, the creative, interruptive forces, right? You have people talk about they had a guardian angel come down and intervene, either through knowledge or direct physical action. And some of those are absolutely made up, but some of them are not. Some of them are fairly well documented from outside witnesses. I believe that those entities exist. I believe that they are both good and evil, that there is good and evil, and that they are aligned, some of them to good and some of them to evil, and that they are meant to shed knowledge and give help in places, but sometimes they give hurt in places. Refer back to Exodus. And so that's the seventh plane of existence. And I believe that the eighth plane of existence is back to God. It is the omnipresent, omniscient eighth realm of the beginning of the new harmonic, right? It is where we come from and it is where we go. And our seven stages are in the middle of that. The eighth is both the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega, and there is a reason why the eight looks like the infinity sign. That's where we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated series of topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those beliefs. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I have an entire playlist devoted to those toes that I stepped on most specifically today, but some of the other ones are in the other playlist too. The 12,000 year disaster cycle, I'm fairly positive that that's a thing. That 6,000 years ago there was a flood, and 6,000 years prior to that there was a giant fire event. It looked like a fiery sword casting people out of Eden. I believe that that's a possibility. I believe that we are at the point of the flaming sword again. That we are coming up into the point where humanity is once again going to bottleneck. And the choices will be limited for a while, but on the other side of that, there is some hope. Most of us will not make it. I probably won't make it. You probably won't make it, but one of us might. And because of that, I do this work. So that on the other side of it, there are people who are educated in this. If it's not me, then at least somebody. I want to build as many Edens as possible. As many places of abundance as possible. So that when it happens, humanity has a better chance. The more people who possess the knowledge, the better the chance that the knowledge survives the next cycle. And that problem has been, we haven't survived the cycles. For the most part, we have been pretty close to fully eradicated every time. And it's never everybody. Some people get saved every time. Not just one race, not just one family, but several families across several thousands of miles. The Hopi were guided to being saved from the flood in the same manner that Utupishtim was, right? Or Noah. Would you rather me call him Noah? Same thing. I do believe that somebody will survive. It may not be me. I hope it is. I hope that I am here to be able to help set the roots for humanity going forward. But if not, hopefully somebody, maybe you, who watches this will be. And so on the other side, we don't fall into the same traps. Maybe we get new traps. That would be cool. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you really like it. Hit me with that super thanks because I do not manifest money. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.